Story 1. My late husband was in a car accident during his senior year in 1986 and received a settlement of $30,000, which he could access at 18. He was a gearhead and wanted to buy a Corvette, but his mom didn't like that idea. She made him a deal. If he bought the car, he would have to pay rent and storage for his other cars, or he could buy property and stay home rent-free for as long as he wanted. So, at 18, we started looking at property, and he bought 10 acres for $5,000. We intended to build there at some point or sell it later on. In the early years, we would have massive parties. There was no one around to bother, and it was great. Eventually, people bought and built on the lots around us, and zoning laws changed to allow one house per acre. So there were several houses, but it was still rural, and a few of us had large empty acreage that the kids would use to ride their dirt bikes. We didn't care. We let them have fun. About 15 years ago, another new house went in, and it was right on the property line. They hadn't even finished construction on the house when the wife began calling to demand I take some trees down because they blocked her view. The funny thing was the view they blocked was from the recreational vehicle they were living in. Once they moved into the house, they wouldn't even be near those trees. So I said, sorry, but no, I'm not cutting the trees. She wasn't happy, and over the next couple of years, she called to complain about all sorts of silly things, including the noise of the kids on dirt bikes. She even got mad at people riding their horses because they made her dogs bark. One spring day, I drove out there and noticed the stream that ran across my property, and theirs had been dammed on my land and diverted about 50 yards from their property line. This sent it along the dirt road that went down a hill and up the other side, creating a pond where it was blocked and another at the bottom of the road, preventing me from accessing the majority of the property. I knew it was their doing because the previous fall winter, she had called to complain my stream was causing her property to flood. First off, it wasn't my stream, and her property didn't flood. In winter months, the stream naturally got larger, flowed downhill, and kept to its banks for decades. Their lot was originally heavily wooded, and they had cleared all the trees and done a bunch of grading. If they had water issues, that's their doing, not mine. Anyway, I went home, and the following weekend, we grabbed the small backhoe and a couple of friends to unblock the stream. We hadn't even unloaded it before we heard her screaming, and the police showed up. They were unsure if they should stop us because our state is environmentally conscious and has strict wetland laws. The cops didn't know if we were rerouting the stream or if they had. I completely understand where they are coming from, and I knew this could happen. So not only did I bring pictures to show how the stream had been, but one of our friends was an official at the Department of Environmental Quality. He was able to explain the law and that we legally needed to put the stream back. We couldn't do much about the pond except wait for it to dry out, but we sent the stream back down its original channel. Of course, when it went to their freshly graded land, it had no channel to follow, and it did flood their yard. Unfortunately for them, the Department of Environmental Quality official felt it was his duty to issue them a citation for diverting and illegally altering the stream. They ended up having to put the stream bed back and revegetate with native plants and shrubs in a 25-foot buffer zone, which took away a portion of their yard. They paid us damages and got a huge fine. As the spring and summer progressed, the kids on dirt bikes discovered the pond. By this time, it was 18 inches deep, and they loved riding through it. So instead of just riding through there, they spent hours in that area, much to the annoyance of the neighbor. She called the police multiple times, but the kids would either be gone or say they had permission to be there. So the police called us, and we said, "Yup, let them ride." We did have concerns about liability if they got hurt, but we liked annoying her, so we took the risk. Not the best idea. And thank goodness no one ever got hurt that we knew about. A couple of years went by, and she learned to text because we ignored her calls when she had something to complain about. I made my annual spring visit and noticed there were 23 large cedar and fir trees cut down. 5 had been cut up, and a path led directly to their very full woodshed. I was angry. This wasn't something I could just fix, and you don't mess with my trees. I called the police, and their excuse was that firewood was their sole source of heat, and they needed the wood. They cut so much so it would dry out over the next couple of years. They got another no trespassing order. The stream one had expired and were charged with theft and vandalism. It took a couple of years, but they ended up having to pay $10,000 for each tree they cut down, which was nice. Plus, we sold 15 of the trees and made another $45,000. They were furious, to say the least. Life went on, And we still got texts every time she heard a dirt bike, horse, or whatever irritated her on any given day. We started having summer campout parties over the next few years, and she always called the police or fire department. Of course, we never got cited because we were not stupid and didn't break any laws. Sadly, my husband died suddenly, and eventually, I decided it was time to sell because I wasn't going to build a house there. So I listed the property for $1 million, which was the market rate at the time. Remember, it was 10 acres, and you could build one house per acre. Anytime people went out there, she would flag them down and tell them it flooded and all sorts of nonsense. She didn't want anyone to build or be there. I should have renewed the second trespass order, but it expired right around the time my husband passed, and it just wasn't important at that moment. Developers were not bothered, and we did get a few offers under the asking price I was happy with. But I really wanted to sell it to an individual who wanted to build a single home, just being sentimental. My agent wasn't happy but understood. One day, he called me with an offer that was much less than any of the others, and they wanted to do an owner-carried contract for 3 years with a balloon payment to pay me off at the end of the 3 years. There was a couple who wanted to meet me out there. I didn't have anything going on the upcoming Saturday, so I said I would meet them with the understanding that I really wasn't interested in carrying the contract and the price was too low. We figured they were hoping to change my mind, and we were hoping they would come in with a better offer. They got there before me, and when I arrived, the unpleasant neighbor was there, telling them how bad the property was. I parked on the main road and was walking in, so none of them even knew I was there. As I approached, 2 little kids came flying up on dirt bikes. She became unglued, grabbed a rock, and threw it at them, came nowhere close to hitting them. The guy immediately started yelling at her and told her to get out of there. It scared her, and she left. He saw me and began to apologize, but I stopped that and thanked him. We started talking, and he explained that part of the reason they wanted this specific property was that they had 2 young boys who rode motocross bikes, and he loved the trails. Plus, he wanted to build a track for them. When he showed me where, I knew he was my buyer. I took the loss on the sale and carried that contract just to spite that neighbor. While that is a huge sum, remember we paid $5,000 for it and got almost $300,000 for the trees and another $20,000 for the nonsense with the stream. Plus, we enjoyed the property for almost 30 years. I got the interest on the contract and the balloon payment, so it wasn't like we really lost out. Plus, knowing the neighbor was going to be miserable for years to come, you just can't put a price on that. I sold it 6 years ago, and I still go out a couple of times a year just to check it out. They have built a beautiful house at the farthest point from the unpleasant neighbor, and there is a huge track up by her place. She still sends me nasty texts, and I should probably block her. But it makes me smile each time knowing she is still angry. Well worth the loss, and I know my late husband would approve. He always knew I was a petty neighbor. Story 2. So, quick note. In most hospitals, if you have tested positive for the illness caused by the recent pandemic, there's a procedure the hospital enacts. It varies by hospital, but generally speaking, the standard procedure is to isolate the confirmed patients and handle them first, barring some major traumas. I was diagnosed and confirmed, so the story begins with me arriving at the hospital emergency room. At the time, I'd experienced some trouble breathing, shortness of breath, and lots of fluid in the lungs. Basically, everything was not good. That's probably putting it mildly, I suppose, but the point stands. I quickly get ushered into the isolation area, completely skipping the line of people waiting as patients, regardless of status, are considered critical. I'm lying on my bed in isolation, waiting for the doctor to see me when I noticed the screech of some kind of wild animal. That animal was an entitled person. I didn't catch all of what she was saying, but I got the impression that she was, in her mind, more important than me. How dare they take an obviously healthy person back first? No amount of talking on the part of the nurses will stop her ranting and raving. Eventually, they must have told her to take a number and wait to be called, because the screeching largely subsided. Around this time, the doctor sees me and gives me some kind of breathing treatment to help with the problems. Though I'm still coughing, we're supposed to keep masks on at all times. But it's kind of hard to do when every 5 minutes or so, it feels like you're coughing up a lung. Even so, I've managed to relax somewhat, camping out there and letting the medication do its work, and generally just dozing. That's when I'm rather rudely awakened by the oxygen mask I'm wearing being snatched from my face, and this inaudible screech of cursing and spittle flying at me. The lady has somehow breached the isolation area and is now screaming in my face about how she is more important and how dare I, a mere plebeian or something, go first. She needs to be seen first. And do I even know who she is? Between her screeching at me and my pressing the nurse call button, it takes maybe a minute for doctors in the full hazardous response gear to respond. They work to pull the lady off me, but not in time to prevent me from going into one of my coughing fits. She's screaming incoherently at this point, and things only escalate from there. Security gets involved, and ultimately she does get what she wants, to be seen. Granted, she ended up being restrained to the bed, and it took a doctor practically yelling at her that she was now exposed to the illness caused by the recent pandemic. This didn't sit well with her. She started blubbering and crying that she was now going to die, and it was all my fault. That didn't last long, though. The tears dried up quickly while the doctor informed her in no uncertain terms that they had video of her breaching the isolation room and that she had taken it upon herself to approach a patient without any form of protection. I ended up having to stay overnight, and she got to enjoy the test where they stick a swab all the way into your sinus cavity for testing and a night at the hospital while the test came back. I have to wonder, in all honesty, if it was worth it. She'd come there for something minor, and now she gets to suffer with the rest of us who caught the virus. I'm in the isolation period now, with maybe a week to go before I'm clear. I ended up with some permanent lung damage from my own ordeal, and a story of someone whose own entitlement got her in some really hot water. Story 3. Background: I 17. Male had just gotten a debit card. I had begged my dad for one for a while and finally got one on my birthday. I work part-time at a fast food chain and put all the money I earn into it. I'm always careful with it and make sure it's with me whenever I'm out. My dad gave me the card so I could see how I could use it, and if I would use it wisely, sort of like a test to see if I can be responsible with money later in life. Keep in mind, my family isn't particularly rich. We're stable, but we don't consider ourselves very prominent. I use the money I get to pay for things I like to buy to ease some of the financial pressure on both my working parents. I use it for things like games for my personal computer, gifts and treats I get for myself whenever I go out, and I've been saving up for a gaming console. The incident: I was hanging out with friends at the mall. We were walking, talking, and browsing stores. Suddenly, one of my friends, let's call her Jay, started feeling dizzy and unwell. We knew what to do since this happened before. She would get nauseous if she walked too much without rest. My two other friends sat her down and calmed her while I rushed to a nearby supermarket to get her water and some aspirin. I got the items and quickly scanned the registers to find them all occupied. At the end of the row of registers, there was a self-checkout lane that was practically empty. I ran toward the machine, scanned my items, and took out my debit card to pay. As I bagged my items, I tried to wiggle the card into my back pocket. I obviously failed, and it fell. But with the place being loud and me trying to be quick, I hadn't noticed that my card had fallen. I ran out to meet up with my friends and make sure Jay was all right. That's when I realized my card wasn't with me. I quickly scanned around the bench we were sitting at and confirmed that I had probably dropped it at self-checkout. I raced back to the checkout area and saw only one person there, the entitled mother. She was scanning a few very pricey items: caviar, sparkling water, premium shampoo, etc. I approached her to ask about my card when I saw that she was holding it in her hands. I politely tapped her shoulder and asked her for my card. She turned and gave an expression I can only hope people of her kind can make. She waved the thing in front of me and said, "Back up, kid. This is mine. Why would a child like you even have this?" I'm a very standard 6'1" male with a baby face, so it was easy to assume I was still going through puberty. "Ma'am, the card is mine. Please give it back." This woman was now ignoring me and was reaching her hand towards the scanning machine to pay for her things. I glanced at the screen with her list of items and was horrified to see the order amount to the equivalent of $200. My card had one of those chips that allows you to simply place the card on the sensor to pay without having to physically swipe the card. I quickly put my hand over the sensor and told her, "Hand it over now." I didn't scream it, but said it sternly enough for it to appear like a threat. What happened next still makes me cringe to this day. The entitled mother fake fell on the ground, started cowering behind her arms, and yelled, "Thief! Thief! He wanted to rob me. He hit me to steal from me. Help!" This immediately caught the attention of everyone at the registers beside us. Enter the nice security guard. He approached us and tried to understand what was going on. He approached the woman first to see what happened, where she sputtered slurs and made derogatory remarks at me. The officer, I later learned, was also of Middle Eastern descent. He helped her up and, turning to me, asked me in Arabic, "What happened?" This took both me and the entitled mother by surprise since this guy looked as white as vanilla. I explained everything in Arabic to the nice security guard, with the entitled mother being ignored as she mumbled and growled. After hearing what I had to say, he ordered us both to come into the back rooms so he could check the tapes. We were both taken by other security guards into the security's main office and waited. After about 5 minutes of awkward silent waiting with the entitled mother, the nice security guard came back and demanded my card back from the entitled mother. She then burst into sobs and tears, claiming she was a single mother and needed the money, giving this whole charade. I watched while I died inside from the amount of discomfort I was in. On one hand, I knew this woman was lying and just looking for an excuse to steal from a minor. But on the other hand, she was a 40-something woman who probably had kids. Instead of being responsible and owning up to her actions, she was playing the victim and throwing a tantrum like a baby. Security confiscated the card, and after confirming that it was mine, it had my name on it, and I had my identification card on me. They led both of us out separately. I met back up with my friends and told them what happened. As I was telling the story, I caught the entitled mother in the corner of my being dragged by police officers, with what looked like her husband and teenage daughter at her side. I looked back up and gave her a gesture of disapproval. She noticed, but before she could do anything, her husband looked toward me and gave me an apologetic look. Single mom, indeed.